Welcome back, everybody. I'm amazed. I think I've worn you out, but I'm glad you're here. And we have one more in this series. I've learned through the years of doing this that 3 lessons like this is about all a congregation can handle because it's pretty heavy material, and you are my troopers. So I want to first give you an A class for sticking with me in this material and coming back for another one. And then secondly, I want to thank you for being a good class of listeners. I realize that this is not the kind of material you'd normally come to a church building to hear about. But I hope it will impact your life in a foundational way. Because my hope is that people who hear these things will have confirmed deep in their heart their conviction that God created this world, and us in particular, and that we have every reason to serve him with all of our being. So let's start this afternoon. Obviously, I've had to pick and choose what I'm going to talk about. So I decided in this particular series of 3 lessons, we'd end up talking about us. So, fearfully and wonderfully made. Who remembers where that picture came from? Does anybody recognize that? Where did it come from? Yeah, that's in the Sistine Chapel. And of course it represents the hand of God and the hand of man, creation, doesn't it? That was the object of that picture. I love that picture as an introduction to this lesson. And Genesis 1 says it this way. Bible students don't need to hear this, but I'm going to read it anyway. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. The Bible speaks of the beginning. And it speaks of human beings as being a distinct creation from everything else. Folks, you cannot get theistic evolution out of Genesis 1. I mean, folks have tried. But God does not say that he brought humans about by a process of evolution over millions of years from lower level creatures. That's not what the Bible teaches. And to try to force that upon the Bible is just a misuse. The Bible says we are distinct creations, the only ones in all of creation made in the image of God. That is clear, isn't it? In the Old Testament, in Genesis chapter 1. And that notion is supported throughout Scripture. Psalm 139 says it this way, verse 13. "For you have formed my inward parts, you have covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well." Of course, that speaks not only to creation of humans, but of the preciousness of unborn humans, doesn't it? And the idea that it would be acceptable to God to take the life of an unborn child is not supported in Scripture. And wonderfully we are made, even from the womb, in the image of God. So, I'll remind you of Romans 1:20 briefly. That's our theme passage for this series. The Bible supports the notion that you can examine the natural world and come to believe that there's a God. So that's why I'm doing this. All right, let's start with our favorite author, Richard Dawkins. I'm going to be quoting from his book, The Blind Watchmaker. We animals, does that give you an idea of where he's coming from? We animals are the most complicated things in the known universe. Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. That's how he starts his book, page 1. Then let's see if I've got a slide on this. Yeah, this is page 3. Let me get over here. The process by which an airliner came into existence is not fundamentally mysterious to us because humans built it. Not a very profound statement. The systematic putting together of parts to a purposeful design is something we know and understand, for we've experienced it at first hand, even if only from our childhood building an erector set. What about our bodies? Each one of us is a machine like an airliner, only much more complicated. Would you say amen to that, class? Much more complicated than an airliner. Were we designed on a drawing board too? And were our parts assembled by a skilled engineer? The answer is no. It is a surprising answer, and we have known and understood it for only a century or so. Charles Darwin first explained this matter in the 1800s. You hear what he said? You're much more complicated than an airliner, but you were not designed. You had no purpose. Let's see what I've got next. I'm going to page 14 now. We shall explain its coming into existence as a consequence of gradual, cumulative, step-by-step transformations from simpler things, from primordial objects sufficiently simple to have come into being by chance. Look, folks, here's Dawkins and every other evolutionist position. Take something as complicated as a human being. If you can break it down into smaller and smaller steps, you eventually reach a point where this step could have happened by natural causes, this small one. And if you don't think that one could, then go further and take another smaller step. Eventually, he's the ultimate reductionist. Everything can be reduced to a simple enough thing that it could have happened naturally. And then if you add those up gradually over time, you get complicated things that were not designed for any purpose. They just came about by natural causes. That is the explanation, class. And it's a fairy tale. It does not answer how complex things like humans came into existence, but they think it does. And that is the position they take. All right, so I need to stick with this for just a minute because I need to do a little more with it. He goes on in the course of his discussion here, and he talks about our author, and I didn't bring that book with me today, but remember I showed you the book Natural Theology by William Paley, and I gave you a little British interpretation of his first day of class? Well, in that book, he explains a lot of reasons to believe in God from the natural world. Here's what Dawkins has to say about him. The watchmaker of my title, The Blind Watchmaker, comes from a famous treatise by 18th century theologian William Paley. His Natural Theology, published in 1802, is the best known exposition of the argument from design. I hope you've been listening to my class. I'm giving you the argument from design. Always the most influential of the arguments for the existence of a God. It is a book I greatly admire, says Mr. Dawkins, for in his own time its author succeeded in doing what I'm struggling to do now. He had a point to make. He passionately believed it, and he spared no effort to ram it home. He had a proper reverence for the complexity of living things, and he saw that it demands a very special kind of explanation. The only thing he got wrong, admittedly quite a big thing, was the explanation itself. He gave the traditional religious answer to the riddle, but he articulated it more clearly and convincingly than anybody had before. The true explanation is utterly different, and it had to wait for one of the most revolutionary thinkers of all time, Charles Darwin. Paley's argument is made with sincere and passionate and informed biological scholarship. But it is wrong, gloriously and utterly wrong. The analogy between a telescope and an eye, between a watch and a living organism, is false. Now, class, if you weren't listening before, listen right now. All appearances to the contrary, the only watchmaker in nature is the blind forces of physics, albeit deployed in a very special way. A true watchmaker has foresight. He designs his cogs and springs and plans their interconnections with a future purpose in his mind's eye. Natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic process which Darwin discovered and which we now know is the explanation for the existence and apparent purposeful form of all life, had no purpose in mind. It has no mind, no mind's eye. It does not plan for the future. It has no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play the role of a watchmaker in nature, it is the blind watchmaker. You get what he's saying, class? The blind forces of physics acted upon by natural selection explains it all. And you're sitting there, class, as a result of that process which had no purpose in mind. You're here at the top of this tree of life. He wouldn't call it the top. He'd call it one branch. And you're the result of a purposeless process by a blind watchmaker. Is that depressing? That's the position he takes. And then he takes 300 pages to try to convince you that that's the case. I'm not convinced. Not at all. And he does a poor job of trying to convince you of such a ridiculous proposition. But that's what we're dealing with, folks. The blind watchmaker. I love Michael Beeh. If you haven't seen his book, Darwin's Black Box, Michael Beeh is a biochemist. He's a Roman Catholic. Are all of you aware that as a Roman Catholic scientist, he has no reason to deny the general theory of evolution? It's been blessed by the Roman Catholic Pope. So as a Catholic, there's no reason for him to turn against it. He has turned against it because of his biochemistry. He says the evidence from my labs and the labs of lots of other people do not support the notion of a blind watchmaker. And he says a lot of this Darwin didn't know, so to him it was a black box. And by the way, if you got the old edition in the 1990s, you need to get the 10-year later one. This is 2006. And it's better because the more we learn, the worse it gets for the blind watchmaker position. Michael Beeh says of this Dawkins, he can simplify to his heart's content because he wants to convince his readers that Darwinian evolution is a breeze. In order to understand the barriers to evolution, however, we have to bite the bullet of complexity. Did I make you bite the bullet this morning? You ain't seen nothing. Because the complexity of living things is beyond anything I have time to explain, and I don't understand it all, by far. But Beeh will tell you, Dawkins tries to make everything so simple that it could have happened by natural causes. Get over it. Biochemistry has demonstrated that any biological apparatus involving more than one cell, such as an organ or a tissue, is necessarily an intricate web of many different identifiable systems of horrendous complexity. That's the case. Everywhere you look. And it's what you need to take the bite if you're going to try to say this could have happened by natural causes. And here's the next book I want to introduce to you. And by the way, while I'm here, I want to be sure and introduce several books. The Mystery of Life's Origin by Bradley, Thaxton, and Olson. This book was first published in the 1990s. This just came out. It's an update of their book printed in the 90s. And it takes every theory of how life originated without God and tears it to shreds. And in here is a whole chapter written by James Tour that I introduced to you. What night was that? Friday night. Yes, ma'am.
So are you saying this is a recommendation?
Absolutely.
It sounds like
The Mystery of Life's Origin.
okay.
And there's a chapter in the back by James Tour. And it's entitled, We're Still Clueless About the Origin of Life. And James Tour is a nanotechnologist. And he studied this deeply. And he will tell you the more we learn about origin of life experiments, the farther we get away from any kind of reasonable explanation for how that happened without God. Anyway, that's an excellent book I'd recommend to you. It's in the bibliography. Here's another one I've just come across by Lofman and Glicksman. Lofman is an engineer. Glicksman is a medical doctor. And the two of them work together on a book called Your Designed Body. And it goes through every part of you and shows how both from an engineer and a medical doctor's perspective, you had to be made. You were designed. And everywhere you look, it's there. So that's a powerful book, and it's brand new. Recommend it to you. All right. So I want to make sure I get all of that in. Of course, we're not going to turn to this book anymore. We're turning to something else from science. Which brings me to the last book that I want to recommend to you this morning. You see this one? Immune. The fellow that wrote this one is called Philip Detmer. He's the creator of the Kurzgesagt website. And his goal in life, Philip Detmer, he's not a scientist. His goal in life is to take complicated things and simplify them enough that most average people can understand it. So he took on the immune system as one of those that he wanted to do that with. He thought it was going to be a one-semester project as a student in a graduate school. It ended up taking 2 years. And he will tell you that this product that came out of it doesn't touch the hem of the garment of what's involved in the immune system. But I love this book because he's funny. He's hilarious. So he's talking about your immune system, how it displays incredible design, and then he says, isn't it interesting how that was evolved? The whole book is evolutionary from one end to the other. It's like, how can you write a book like this and still come out of it and talk like this stuff evolved over millions of years? But that's where he is. So if you go to his website, there's all kinds of video clips, and we're going to show you one a little bit later. But let me get back to my notes now, make sure I haven't forgotten something. Because typically before this lecture, I will have sat down for 30 minutes. We were eating hamburgers. So let's see. I'm not seeing the other book I want. I thought I brought it with me. Let me see here. Here it is. What Darwin Didn't Know. Jeffrey Simmons. Class, Jeffrey Simmons was raised an evolutionist and an atheist. He believed the general theory of evolution all his life. Worked his way through medical school. The whole time he was an evolutionist. When he began practicing medicine, he came across some of Beeh's works and some of these other men's works and his own practice. And he began to see the things I've been taught do not explain the way the human body functions. They don't explain this. And he himself became a believer in God after having been an evolutionist all his life. I love that kind of story. So this is another good book for you to read. And he looks at every system of the human body and shows why it could not have evolved. It had to be designed. So I'm sharing with you just a couple of things from Dr. Simmons. Every aspect of human physiology has multiple facets, steps, purposes, managers, feedback loops, anticipated outcomes, and double checks. Every function is too complex to have been formed by slow, accidental changes that luckily fit together. Seems obvious, doesn't it? But it isn't obvious to the likes of Richard Dawkins. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, class, and we're going to focus in on one system, the immune system, because I want to. That's why. And because I have a good new book that's funny, that makes the point. So class, are you ready? We're going to talk immune system. I'm opening to page XI in the introduction of Philip Detmer's book. Imagine waking up tomorrow feeling a bit under the weather. An annoying pain in your throat and your nose is runny and you cough a bit. All in all, not bad enough to skip work, you think, as you step into the shower pretty annoyed at how hard your life is. While you are totally not being a whiny little baby, your immune system is not complaining. It is busy keeping you alive as you go about whining for another day. And so while intruders roam your body, killing hundreds of thousands of your cells, your immune system is organizing complex defenses, communicating over vast distances, activating intricate defense networks, and dishing out a swift death to millions, if not billions, of enemies. All the while you're standing in the shower mildly annoyed. But this complexity is largely hidden, which is a real shame because there are not many things that have such a crucial impact on the quality of your life as your immune system. It's all-embracing and all-encompassing, protecting you from bothersome nuisances like the common cold, scratches and cuts, to life-threatening stuff like cancer, pneumonia, and deadly infections like COVID-19. Your immune system is as indispensable as your heart or your lungs. And actually, it is one of the largest and most widespread organ systems throughout your body, although we don't tend to think about it in those terms. I like that introduction. You're standing in your shower, slightly annoyed, while your immune system is busy at work. So my goal, class, for the next few minutes is to have you walk out of here stupefied about your immune system. Because while you're sitting there digesting a hamburger, your body's busy. Because you're at war all times. Are you aware of this? You're at war all the time. Does the Bible say you're at war all the time spiritually also? Yes, it does. There's a constant battle. And he says in Ephesians 6, you better put on the whole armor of God. And God has provided you, beloved, an army that's fighting for you every second of every day. That's the truth. Now, he says it all just evolved without any design whatsoever. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. All right. So that's the beginning. So did you give them a handout? Everybody got a handout? I want you to get it out, please. Can I have one too? Yeah, give me one of those, just so I can point to it. This is what I'm talking about. Everybody needs to have one if you don't. Let's get them one. And I'll wait just a second. And I hope you have something to write with, because I'm going to make you at least write 2 or 3 things. So if you'll take this piece of paper and turn over on the back, I want you to write 4 characteristics of the immune system that are absolutely critical. And here's Michael Beeh's description of them. Everybody got it? Okay. Notice up here, Michael Beeh says on the immune system, There are 4 characteristics. Diversity, write it down. Diversity. And skip a little space after you write it. In other words, I want these in a column, but I want you to skip space so you have time to write something in between. Diversity is a characteristic of your immune system. It's got to have diversity. Second is recognition. That's your second word. Skip down and write the word recognition. And then third, the word destruction. That's the third word down. And then the fourth word down is toleration. And so we're going to talk about each of those in the course of this lecture and give you just a taste. And then you're going to get this book. You will thoroughly enjoy this book. When I was reading through this, my wife would come to my office and I'd be laughing out loud. Because of the way he writes it. It's hilarious. And it's so good. I don't want you to miss it. Just skip the evolutionary part. So here's what Beeh says. All of these and more interact with each other. Whichever way we turn, a gradualistic account of the immune system is blocked by multiple interwoven requirements. These 4 characteristics have to all be busily engaged together, or you'd be dead. Now you need to understand something, class. Your immune system is so powerful that it can kill you in 5 minutes. Are you aware of that? Your own immune system could kill you. So one of the biggest problems is it needs to recognize, is this an enemy or is this you? It's got to distinguish between you and anything else. It's called you and the other. And sometimes the other doesn't get recognized properly. And sometimes you don't get recognized properly. So your own immune system attacks you. And you don't want that. But in any case, there's always multiple interwoven requirements. And that's one of the challenges for an evolutionist. How does all this get started? By small-scale changes over long periods of time. You can't even conceive of such a thing. As scientists, we yearn to understand how this magnificent mechanism came to be, but the complexity of the system dooms all Darwinian explanations to frustration. And I say, amen. It's so complex. And please, when we get through today, we will not have given it proper attention. We're just going to get a taste. So there's your handout that I told you. If you'll turn over to the other side, you will see the basic breakdown of your immune system. And you can see 3 great pieces to this. And how much time we spend on them is my choice. But there's going to be a limited time. But over here you see anatomical and physiological barriers. And what's number 1 at the top, class? Skin. You know your skin is the biggest organ of your body and probably the most important barrier you have. It keeps out all kinds of stuff. There's a whole chapter in here by Demmer on your skin. Let me see if I can find the title to that chapter. Hang on just a second. He calls it the desert kingdom of the skin. And it's because the skin on its outer surface is slightly acidic, and it's got all kinds of stuff in it that'll destroy things. Did you know that? It keeps a lot of your enemies at bay. And the skin is tough. It's got layers. All of you aware of this? Down at the bottom, it's rebuilding skin cells all the time. Remember I showed you mutation last night? I mean, not mutation. What's the word I'm looking for? Mitosis. Cell division. That's happening all the time, 3 layers down from your skin. And you're building new skin cells all the time. And then they migrate up, and as they migrate up, they change their features slightly, and then about 2/3 of the way up, they die, and they interlock, and they become dead skin cells on the top, really tough, helps protect you. And then they introduce fatty stuff to make it feel better. And it's amazing that just little few millimeters there, your skin protects you. It's amazing stuff. You think we could spend another day on that? Yes, of course. But we have to go on. Cilia, especially in your lungs. What's a cilia? Anybody know? It's a hair. You have a bunch of cilia at your lungs at the entranceway, and they're waving around like this all the time. You know what that's for? Filtration. To help keep bad stuff out of your lungs. That's why smokers develop problems a lot of times, because they break down those cilia and they harm them. So you can't protect yourself as well. But every little hair is important, class. May I do this with you? Keynesian walkers, remember I mentioned that to you? Keynesian walkers help build hairs in your lungs. You have to build those hairs. Your body built thousands of hairs in your lungs, and every case used Keynesian and Dineen walkers going back and forth to build that hair. There's a whole chapter in the book about building hairs.
In this book?
No. There's a book that has a chapter on building hairs. You think your hairs are important? I'm not talking about up here. I'm talking about inside your body as part of the protective system. It's critically important. And you've got machines building hairs all the time. Am I getting across to you?
Don't you have cilia in your nose too?
You do. Very important. Protects your breathing. Yes, ma'am. You got hairs other places too, which we're not going to talk about. All right, so I don't have time to talk about the low pH in the stomach, but that helps you. And the lysosomes in tears and saliva, once you ingest something, you've got something happening immediately in your mouth. Starts attacking the enemies and anything that's bad for you. Do we have time to talk about that? No, class. We're skipping all that. What I want to talk to you about is what happens when the real big guns get involved, and that's when you burst one of these barriers and you get inside of you. That's when the real problems start and when the real immune system goes to work. So look, your inside immune system is made up of the innate system and the adaptive system, two major parts. These parts both have their own function, and they all interplay. The innate system is both cellular and humoral. Anybody know what humoral means? You know that? Tell them what it means.
Humoral is the liquid part of the blood.
Correct. The humoral part is your bloodstream and your lymph system. It's kind of like liquidish.
Mostly protein.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just right.
Just right. Exactly. The adaptive system is also cellular and humoral. It has those parts. And all of these parts interplay. You see how you see these little puzzle pieces? There's a reason it's written that way. They all interplay and interconnect with one another. And they're all important to all the others. But let me show you the difference. The innate system, here's I'm blowing it up a little bit. This is a little bigger. Is non-specific. That means it doesn't care what the enemy is. It's going to get the enemy. If there's an enemy, it's going to get it. Fast response. These are the guys that start acting immediately. When you get a cut and you've broken your skin, that's big trouble for the inside of you. These are the guys that get busy immediately.
You're talking about the whole lymph thing is the blood section?
Yes, ma'am. This first section, this innate system. And they call it innate because it's built in and it happens immediately. It's fast. But it's non-specific. In other words, it doesn't pick out a particular enemy. It's going to kill enemy. Whatever's not us. They don't like it. All right. Third, it doesn't produce any memories. The innate system just kills stuff. And it doesn't care about memory. It just wants to get rid of the bad guys. Okay? Fast, non-specific, and no memory. You ought to write that down on your chart. If you would, on the innate side, just put non-specific, fast, no memory. Because that way it'll help you remember. And you can do well on the test tomorrow. So far, we've got 3 tests going. You know I'm kidding. But I wouldn't be if you were in my class. All right? That's that side. And I'm pausing a little bit because some people are writing, and I want you to be listening. All right, now notice, class, this adaptive side over here depends on this side. This doesn't start acting until this is already acted. There's dependency there. So the adaptive side is specific. This side goes after particular enemies. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Secondly, it has to be primed. That means it doesn't just happen instantly. It has to be primed. Something has to stimulate it. And then thirdly, it's slower because it has to be primed, and it has to have some things happen over here first before it goes into action. So it's slower. This side over here, the innate side, it will happen in microseconds. It starts acting instantly. And it can happen over a period of 2 or 3 days. This side may not even start acting till a couple of days, or several hours at least, because it's dependent on this side. But the nice thing about this side is it produces memory cells. And those memory cells stay in your body. And if that same enemy ever comes back again, he says, I know you. That's why adults can take care of disease better than little kids, because they've had experience, and your body remembers previous illnesses you had and can identify that enemy more quickly and act on it. Okay? So, those are the basic features of these 2 parts of your immune system. Now, do you think each part deserves a whole lot of attention? And there's a whole lot to say. So we're going to pick and choose. So, I've decided to use Philip Detmer's video on the immune system. And we're going to have some fun. So I'm going to share with you some things he has to say as we go through this. And so, with the help of my expert AV guy, we're now going to introduce you to the main features of the immune system as he first goes ahead until I tell him to stop. Go. You see these up here? These are the bad guys, the pathogens. And now stop. Okay. Over here you have the innate system. The neutrophils, the macrophages, the complement, the dendritic cells, the monocytes, the natural killer cells, the infected cells, the eosinophils, the basophils, the mast cells, and these are parasitic worms, which are big problems. Over here is the adaptive system that includes T cells and B cells, primarily. But what I want you to notice, class, look up here at this chart. The red line says attack and kill. So look at this. Attack and kill, attack and kill, attack and kill, attack and kill. These are guys that are killing parasites. And this guy gets involved. These are antibodies, but there's a whole lot has to go on before this guy can get involved in attacking and killing. Can you see all that? The red lines. All right? The blue lines are activate. Let's look at those. It takes these guys to activate these guys. It takes these guys to activate these B cells. It takes these dendritic cells to activate T cells. T cells in turn activate virgin T cells and killer cells, and they also activate plasma cells, and they also activate other kinds of B cells. So there's a lot of activation going on. People activating one another. You see? Now look up here. Communicate. These purple ones, there's a lot of communicating going on. These guys communicate, these communicate, these communicate. Your system's talking to itself chemically. So can I pause there just a minute? How does a cell communicate inside your body? Huh?
Protein.
Yeah. It's called signaling. They send out signals. And some of them are protein-like. But it's chemical signals. I think that's the best way to answer it. Chemical signals. Look, when you cut your thumb, the cells inside start saying, help! Only they do it chemically. They send out chemical signals, come help. And I'm telling you, your innate system gets after it. There's a lot of communication going on. All right, then do you see this produce antibodies, the orange? These guys, the B cells, are the ones that produce antibodies. But that doesn't happen until they get activated. And then they start getting into the battle. Okay? And then, morph. What do you think that means? Morph. They go into action and something else. What? Something changes. So that's what? Green. A virgin killer T cell can morph into a killer T cell. Virgin means it's not experienced. Folks, your T cells have to go to school. Do you know that? Your T cells go to school. And you know why? They are terrible. They're going to kill you if they don't go to school. You have to train them. Just like you train your kids so they won't kill each other. Well, it's not quite like that. But the fact is, you got to be careful. So things morph. So look, let's see here. Where are we? Helper T cells morph into memory T cells. B cells morph into memory B cells and to long-lived plasma cells. There are changes going on in this process. So they morph into something else and provide help to you. Okay? I love that overview. Thanks to Mr. Detmer. That's a great job. Now, let's talk about some specifics. Here we go. Stop right there. You need to be introduced to your lymph system. You have lymph nodes all over your body. You're aware of this? Lymph nodes. How do you know that? Cancer. And part of what they're doing is to fight something going on in your lymph system. My daddy had a skin cancer up here. It was level 4, and it was, what's the worst one called? Melanoma. They cut it out, but they didn't get it all. And it ended up in his lymph system here. So the thing they did in that time was cut out his entire neck piece here and remove all those lymph nodes. And my daddy, that happened in 1977. He died in 2015. So they did the right thing. They got at the root of it. But what you need to know, class, is your lymph system is critically important to you besides your bloodstream. It's a whole system. There's a lot of lymph nodes, and there are areas where things collect that are part of your immune system that help it function. Go on now. There are two key things. Stop right there. The thymus gland sits right up here beneath your neck, and that thymus is very important to your lymph system. That is the home of Murder University. You listening? Murder University. Because every T cell that your body makes, which by the way is billions per day. You listening? Your B cells are made in your stem cells in the back here, in your backbone. So are your T cells. Every T cell your body makes has to go to university, and that's in the thymus. And he calls it Murder University. And look, how long are you going to put up with me this afternoon? Will you let me go to 1:30?
As long as you'll put up with
Yeah. Can you all handle 1:30? All right. Then I'm going to take a little. Yeah, 2:30. I mean, it's already 2 o'clock. You can put up at 1:30, obviously. All right. Then I'm going to take a little side trip here. Let me see what chapter this is. This is chapter 18. It's called The Murder University of the Thymus. I just got to read you a little bit of this. As you can imagine, 7% of all Americans suffer from autoimmune disease. That means that your immune system's attacking you. As you can imagine, the body takes this issue very seriously. And it came up with Murder University of the Thymus. He says it evolved. It's ridiculous. After a fresh young T cell has been born, it travels to the university and begins its training, which consists of 3 steps, or better yet, 3 tests. The first test is basically just making sure the T cells have the ability to make working T cell receptors. If this were a regular school, this would be the teachers checking if the students have all their notebooks and required reading material with them. Only they would not send the students home if they forgot something. They would rather shoot them in the face. All right? Fail test 1. You didn't bring the stuff you were supposed to bring. Shape up. This is Murder University. Now, what I'm reading to you is funny, but it happens. The T cells that pass test 1 have functional receptors. If they didn't, they'd be dead. Great job so far. The second test is called positive selection. Here the teacher cells check to see if, did you hear what I said? The teacher cells. Do you know your thymus had teacher cells in it that train T cells? The teacher cells, I lost my place, will check to see if the T cells are really good at recognizing the receptors of the cells they will need to work with. Please listen to me carefully. You want those T cells to recognize the ones they're going to have to work with. Imagine this part as if the teacher's checking to see if the pens the students brought are full of ink and that the workbooks are in fine condition. You want a T cell that's really good at recognizing the receptors of everything it's got to work with. Once again, you fail the test. What do you think? Boom! You're dead. Sorry. After the 2 first hurdles have been taken, the last and most important test waits for the T cell students. It's called negative selection. This might be the hardest test of all. The final exam is simply this. Listen to me, class. Can the T cell recognize self? Can its receptor connect to the main proteins inside the body? The proteins that make you, you. The only acceptable answer is no. You don't want them connecting to you because they'll kill you. You listening? So in the final exam, T cells are presented in your thymus with all sorts of protein combinations that are used by the cells in your body. The way this happens is pretty fascinating, by the way. The teacher cells in the thymus that do the testing have a special license to make all sorts of special proteins that usually are made only in the organs, like the heart, the pancreas, the liver, and also hormones like insulin, for example. So they're making images of that in the thymus to test every T cell. So they bring it into their presence, and they better say, no! If a T cell is able to recognize any of these self-proteins, they are taken out back and shot in the head immediately. That's why they call it Murder University. All right, you want to take a guess? In this next paragraph, he says, all in all, blank out of 100 students that enter the university will not survive the 3 tests. You say 50? Anybody else want to make a guess? How many T cells do you think survive those 3 tests? Out of 100. You said 25? You're a real pessimist, aren't you? No, you're pretty optimistic is what you are. 15? What am I asking for? How many fail it? Yeah, how many fail the 3 tests? How many do not make it through? 98 out of 100. You've run out of bullets. Your body's in the charge of killing cells a lot. Did you know this? Let me introduce a new word to you. Apoptosis. You heard of that word? You want to tell them what it means?
A cell kills itself.
Apoptosis is when a cell destroys itself. Did you know there's lots of cells in your body that destroy themselves for your sake? There are. And they do it because if they don't, they're going to attack you. Apoptosis, very important. It's happening all the time. And somebody better clean up the mess.
What's getting me confused is the T cell, because the T cell sounds like a teacher cell.
Yeah, I know. The wording in immune system is terrible. They've made up a lot of words that don't make sense to use them the way they do. But you're stuck with it. In other words, class, in the thymus, there are a lot of dead T cells. 2 out of 100 make it through the 3 tests. Well, you don't think that's very much, right? Listen to what he says. And 98 of 100 students are killed before they graduate. Roughly 10 to 20 million T cells leave your thymus every day.
Oh, so they're not really stuck there.
No, the dead ones don't leave, but the 2 that do leave include 10 to 20 million every day. So when you get 2 out of 100, you're still getting 10 to 20 million that come out alive.
So are the 98 the ones that cause thyroid cancer?
I don't know about that, but they're dead and they have to be removed some way. Did you know your body has garbage men and cleanup methods by which they clean up the mess that's left in your body from all the dead stuff? It does have that. Well, I got sidetracked here, but I had to include the Murder University class. And every T cell has to go through that university, or it doesn't get to function as a T cell. All right. That was a side trip. Your spleen's also very important. We don't have time to deal with that, but it's right there. Go. And then there's vessels all over your body. There's a lymph system. And here are some of your friends, as we're going to introduce in a minute. Stop right there. Here's your Army class. I'm going to introduce them to you. And I'm not going to make you write these down. But these guys are called macrophages. And one of the things I like about Detmer is he draws a picture of them. Do these guys look kind of big and mean? I mean, they're big.
They look like potatoes that haven't gotten eaten.
Kind of. They're single-celled organisms, but they're big. Relative to cell size, these guys are big. So those are called macro, means big. Phages, what does that mean? Eat. So these are big eaters. They're the first line of defense in the innate system. You need your macrophages. Okay? Well, that's T cells. We're not to that yet. This is on the innate side. We're back to that other side, that's immediate. T cells are on the adaptive side. We'll get to that later. These are macrophages. These are instant killers. You want them. You want a lot of them. Okay, go. Next, stop right there. The pink guys, those are called your dendritic cells. These are called the heavy soldiers. They're one out on the front of the battlefield. The dendritic cells is your intelligence branch. They come into play when you know you've got a bigger war on your hands that the macrophages can't handle. The dendritic cells we'll come to in a minute. They're your intelligence agents. Next. Go a little further right there. All right, these guys, these are your T cells. They come along later. They're like the colonels and the captains. They kind of direct things. T cells do all kinds of stuff. Steve was telling me he's learned about, what, a page full of T cells?
Yeah, when I started training, there were 4 basically, and when I left the hospital, we had a chart. I bet there were 50 different types of T cells.
The more we learn. There's variations of T cells, lots of them. But basically, they direct and they help and they do all kinds of things. Very important. And then these guys are the B cells, and they're the ones that produce antibodies and also memory cells. And both of these guys produce memory cells. And then finally, come to that one. One more, stop right there. I have to read you this, because I'm going to say it just right, so let me find it here. Oh, phooey. That's what you get for not being organized, class, and not having a few minutes before class to get yourself together. These are called the crazy suicide bombers. These guys, they're the neutrophils. He says they are like a chimp on coke with a temper and a machine gun. Did you get that? Picture that in your mind. A chimp on coke with a temper and a machine gun. That's a good description of these guys. Because neutrophils are out to kill. That's their job. And when your body produces them by the billions, they're only supposed to live just a few minutes. Because if they live much longer, they're going to start killing you. Because they don't care what they kill. They kill whatever's out there. And if there's any slight hint that there's an enemy out there, and they'll do whatever it takes, class. They're a chimp on coke with a temper and a machine gun. There's your army, provided by God to protect you. Incredible. Let's go on. So here you are, class, standing against all your enemies. Enemies from all sides. Stop. You know how many bacteria are sitting on your skin right now? Scary stuff. Go read the book. It's by the billions all over your body, waiting to get in some cases cooperating with your skin and doing wonderful things for you to protect you. And there's a lot of other ones that want to get inside and do damage. And some of them don't give up quickly. You're in a war constantly, and if you didn't have an immune system, you'd be dead in a matter of minutes. All right, go. So what we're going to show in this case, this is some of your internal enemies. Those are cancer cells, and these are outside enemies, all kinds of pathogens, and you've just cut your thumb. Oh, no. And you say, stop right there. To you, it's no big deal you cut your thumb. You put a Band-Aid on it and go on, right? It depends on what you cut. Do you see my ear right here? I've got a little wound there. I don't know what's going on. I've got to go have it fixed. But it gets bleeding every morning almost. I can't stop it because I'm on blood thinners. So this is a problem. And it's a continual nuisance. I don't know what's going on. But when you open up your skin like that, it's trouble for the guys inside. Because your skin is your number one protector. And so you cut your thumb, you put a Band-Aid on, you know what's going to happen. It's going to coagulate. We're not even talking about blood clotting, class. That's another whole thing that happens, a cascade of reactions, amazingly. And it happens when you need it, where you need it, and how long you need it, and not too much, or you clot yourself to death. Finely balanced. But when you cut a hole in you, that's war inside. Go ahead. You're letting in all these enemies. Look, they're flooding. You see all these on your skin? They're coming in there looking around. Hey, this is a kind of nice place. I want to take up residence here. So here comes these enemies all around. Look at this guy. He's coming in here and he's pooping in there and leaving all his mess behind. And there's trouble in River City. And this little cell, I see how he's been ripped apart. I mean, these guys are in trouble, so they start screaming, "Yeah! Help! Send me help." This sent out chemical signals, and here comes what? A macrophage. Stop right there just a second. Folks, if you took an average-sized cell and you said, "That's me," a macrophage would look like this. Go ahead. There's the macrophage, and stop. That would be comparable to a blue rhino by me. That cell is way bigger than the average cell. The macrophage is big. So he's like the rhino. And watch, go ahead. Here's Detmer's thing. You don't want to get a rhino mad. Watch. Rah! See, you get him all fired up. And here's what happens. He starts sticking his tentacles out and grabbing the enemy. How does this guy eat? He grabs the enemy, he takes him into his skin, and then he wraps him up and makes a little vacuole, and then he shoots him with acids and cuts him up into pieces live and eats him. He's a mean dude. So watch. Takes him inside in the vacuole, shoots him with acid, cuts him into pieces, eats what he wants, and then shoots the rest out for somebody else to eat. That's how a macrophage works. So watch him going at it here. Up, the problem is, stop right there. You see him say burp, and I'm full. One of these can eat 100 enemies before he gets kind of full up. But you got a bunch of them, so they can kill thousands. But they do get tired. So they call for help. And guess what comes next? What do you think? After the macrophages. You want to take a guess? I gave you your army members a while ago. Well, go ahead. It's the neutrophils. The chimps on coke with a temper and a machine gun. And here they come. Out of your bloodstream, they filter over into the lymph nodes, and they come after it. Go. Watch the neutrophils. I'm coming after you. They also take them in and chew them up. Take them in and chew them up. And the cell says, "Stop, get away from me." And he blows himself up. You see that? And this guy says, "Ooh, that was close." Because he almost killed him. Watch them. They can spew out stuff, all kinds of mess. They do whatever it takes to kill enemies. Spew, but it'll also kill your cells here. This is the problem. So they don't want this guy around very long. They want him long enough to do a lot of damage to the enemies and minimal damage to you. And here this guy, look at him. He's blowing himself in a specific way that all of this stuff that comes out, part of his guts, kills enemies. And even after he's done all of that, this guy's not finished. You watch. I'm coming after you. You die. Stop. Listen, folks. Neutrophils are deadly. And they'll kill you in a second. So they kill themselves within a short time. Apoptosis. And you know those big macrophages? They also clean up garbage. So they come behind and they clean up all the blown up neutrophils and everything else that's been killed, all those enemies that have been spewed out, and there's stuff everywhere. You realize how filthy things get when that war's going on inside of you? It's trouble. But they've got a process for cleaning it up. All right, go. So that's the neutrophils. But that's not going to do it, because sometimes that's not enough help, and so you still have to have trouble. So it inflames. Inflammation is very important. The blood comes flowing in, and then you're just inundated with what's called the complement. And we don't have time to talk about the complement. But a complement also blows things up. Stop right there. There are 2 chapters in this book on the complement. It's too complicated. I don't have time to explain it to you. But we'll show you a little bit in just a minute. Go. We don't have time for the complement. But there's a lot happening there. A lot of activity in here that helps kill your enemies. And they get tired, so they call for help. And it's time now for the dendritic cells to get to work. This is the intelligence arm. So they also take in enemies, chew them up, stop, and in this case, they spread parts of the enemy all over their bodies. So he's got dead parts of the enemy all over him. and then he enters the lymph system. Go. Dendritic cells go into your lymph system like this, and they start filtering through your lymph vessels, and they go to lymph nodes. You see all these nodes? And in those nodes, they're finding whole collections of T cells that are sitting there waiting. We're here to help, but they have to be activated. You got to find the right T cell for the right enemy. So the macrophages and the B cells can be activated. The T cells have to be picked. Go. There's lots of T cells, and every one of them is different. You need the exact right one. Remember I told you it's specific? So watch. Here comes the dendritic cells. He's looking for the right T cell. These are not the right ones. Nope, you get away. I don't want you. But this one, aha! Stop right there. That's the piece of the dead enemy. And he happens to be attracted to that particular T cell. Do you see that? This is the right one. The antigen has picked the right T cell. T cells are specific. All right, so you got the right one. Now let's see what happens. Well, it's love at first sight. Of course. And then, stop. Did you see the kiss? Go back a little bit, could you? IT guy? Okay. Stop right. No, keep going. Yeah.
Greatest test.
Stop if you can. Right. No. That's hard, isn't it? Well, did y'all see the kiss? All right. What you've done is you've activated the T cell. The enemy piece activated the T cell, and now it's ready to go. You caught it. Look at there. There's the kiss. Pretty important, because what it does is sends a chemical message up there. Tells him to get busy. So here we go. So he's now poking him, say, all right, guy, get busy. It's kind of like a teenager. You're trying to get him out of bed. Come on. Shape up. Your time to get active. So what he does is he starts dividing. That particular T cell becomes 2, which then becomes 4, which then becomes 8, which then becomes 16. And in short order, it becomes thousands. And it starts migrating to the enemy battlefield, and the rest of them start going through your bloodstream. It comes over here to the battlefield, and watch what he does. This macrophage is worn out. He's eaten all he can eat, and he's tired. He's been fighting the whole time long. He's sick and tired of doing this. And here come the helper T cells, and they look at him, and they inject him. Look at this. Wake up. Come on, guy. Encouragement. You are good. We got lots of enemies. We need your help. Come on. Help. Let's go. And you've just turned him back into a ARG. And he's after him again. And they do that all over the place. So you've activated your army again, and they're back at it. And the rest of these guys start going around and trying to find the right B cells right here. They're looking for the right ones. You see how he put that eye on them? They don't have eyes, class. But he found the right B cell there, and they start dividing, and watch. They start dividing by the thousands, and they turn into, some of them, plasma cells and start building antibodies by the billions. And by this time, you're 2 or 3 days down the road. Your thing's healing up very nicely. You don't have any idea what all's going on in there, but they're busy, because here's what's happening. The antibodies come, and they surround these enemies. Watch these little antibodies. They make them collect together. They make their life miserable, and they make them easy to find by their enemies, and they come in and sop them up and slop up the rest of them, and your enemies are done. And then they kill themselves. You see this? Apoptosis. Stop there just a second. People, when that battle's over, if your immune system doesn't kill itself, it's going to kill you. So there's a lot of apoptosis. But here's what happens. The rest of those B cells turn into memory cells. These are out now to get your enemies if they ever see them again. So watch this movie. Go. They're looking. Do I see any enemies? And watch this guy. Stop right there. He says, I know you. You are a previous enemy, and I'm going to get you. And what happens, class, is memory cells bypass all those steps. They say, I know you. You're dead. And calls on your immune system instantly, even the adaptive system. Powerfully good stuff. Go. And then there are the B cells. Some of them also turn into memory cells that live in your body for the rest of your life, that help protect you from previous enemies. And that's the end. I hope you saw in that. Turn to the back of your paper. 4 things. Diversity. You have lots of different kinds of T cells, lots of different kinds of B cells, lots of different kinds of antibodies, and you have to have that because you have to identify lots of enemies. Diversity. There's a whole 3 lectures on that, class. What's the second word? Recognition. What do you need to recognize? Who's the enemy and who's you? There are 16 different ways the body does that involve all kinds of different things. Don't have time to talk about it. What's the third one? Destruction. They better be able to kill something. And did I show you that? How about a chip on coke with a machine gun? Neutrophils, macrophages are great killers. There are also killer T cells that are deadly, but they have to be trained first. In what? Murder University. And then what's the fourth one? Toleration. Why does it need toleration? Why does your immune system need toleration? It has to put up with you. You better tolerate you. That's why in Murder University, you don't want T cells that are going to attack your own proteins. So they better say no to that one, or they're dead. Toleration is critically important for an immune system. And that, class, is what God has done to protect you from your continual billions of enemies. And you do pretty well, don't you? I mean, some of us are almost 80 years old. We've survived war for 80 years. And a lot of people survive longer than that. Thanks be to what God had designed for us. So, again, I feel totally inept, but I hope you've gotten a taste, and maybe you'll feel enough encouraged to read that book and learn a lot more. And you can skip the really hard parts. You can just enjoy. It's great and enjoyable, and it's a testimony to the amazing God we are privileged to serve. So thank you for the time and for your good attention in spite of being right after lunch. You did really well. Thank you, and we'll turn it over to you.